Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and tonight we've got a very interesting program. Of course, anytime you bring up things like what we're planning on talking about, whether it's the demonic or the stone cutters, the ones who like to build pyramids with eyes in them, that kind of thing. Anytime you bring that sort of thing up, what winds up happening is that the devil starts poking holes in your plan to try and get the word out. So tonight, of course, we're running just a little bit behind because we've run into a series of technical issues. What should have been a very simple setup suddenly isn't working, and we can't figure out why. So my guest, who is Ted Flynn, he's a Catholic author. He's written the book, The Thunder of Justice, another book, Hope of the Wicked, which was actually influential for me when I was writing my senior thesis in college. He's going to be here to talk to us about his new book, The Great Reset. Actually, the full title of the book is The Great Reset, The Globalist Plan versus Heaven's Victory. Now, the problem is, for whatever reason, we can't get him in through the video screen. For whatever reason, his computer just isn't syncing up. It's not connecting to our video streaming platform. So I have him here on the cell phone, and hopefully we can get the sound boosted enough so that you guys can hear him through my microphone and then to your speakers. Please God, that'll work out. But before we get into any of that this evening, why don't we go ahead and start with our prayer as usual. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Our Lady of Victory, pray for us. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Now, before we jump into the program, what I would like to do is remind all of you out there who are not regular contributors or members of the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team that we do this every week. Every Friday, we get together with a group of faithful, like-minded Catholics. We have a great conversation about things that are important to our faith, things that are going on in the church, and we just kind of discuss what it means, what's happening, how to make sense of it, and then ultimately what to do about it. You can join the Anchor Team. It's only $15 a month. That's 50 cents a day by going to lepantoin.org/anchor -team. And I am putting a link right in the comments section. As I said, if you'd like to join, it's $15 a month. We have all of the past episodes archived. You can watch all, I think we've got over 200 hours worth of content. You can watch any episode that you want, catch up on stuff from several years ago, stuff from last year, stuff from last month. We do encourage as many people to join. You can ask anybody in the chat section what their thoughts are on the Anchor Team, and I'm sure they'll be glad to share what their experience is and how much they enjoy it, and I do hope that you will join us as well. Now, I want to bring in our guest, Ted Flynn. As I mentioned, he is a Catholic author. He's done extensive research into the Freemasons, into the history of the assaults on the church, the assaults on truth. His book, Hope of the Wicked, was a fantastic piece of work. What it did is it traced all of the different ways, the different tendrils of the large multi-tentacled monster that is assaulting both the family and the church at the same time through the destruction of civilization. And he did so by talking about the Rockefellers. He talked about the formation of the Department of Education, and how the Department of Education was influenced by all sorts of other like-minded individuals who were trying to destroy and bring down education and to create more of an indoctrination program to bring people into a certain mindset that would ultimately usher in a global government. So Ted, I have to say, first of all, I have to say thank you to you for your book, The Hope of the Wicked, because it really was a huge help for me when I was writing my thesis. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, it's a book I haven't talked a lot about, and I just ended up reprinting it because there were people asking for it. And it actually has 1,216 footnotes in it. That is actually, I called it in the year 2000 when it was released, a cabal of evil. But it's actually, the term now has become the deep state, and as we know, the deep church, because there really isn't any difference between the deep state and the deep church, how it operates. They use the exact same principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we continue, I just want to do a mic check so that everybody can let me know in the chat room. How does the sound? Does he sound good? Can you hear him well? I can change the gain and everything on the box over here. If the sound is still too quiet, please let me know.
Speak up a bit, Michael. I could actually speak up if it's not moving from your phone mic to the boom mic that you use.
Okay, great. Actually, I'm getting some great feedback. Everybody says that they can hear you just great. So we'll continue this way. I'll just hold the phone literally next to the mic. So
I won't go.
Okay, so we're good to go. Let's start with your new book. I want to introduce your new book. I'm going to put your the cover of your new book here on the screen so that people can see it. The book is titled The Great Reset: The Globalist Plan versus Heaven's Victory. So before we get into anything, I want you to kind of summarize for us, what is the Great Reset? What does it mean? What does it mean for us? What's going on here?
We'll go over a little bit of history very, very quickly with just major subjects. The Great Reset is just a term. It actually doesn't mean anything that hasn't happened many, many times in history. And if you want to go back to what is the absolute original thinking is, there really isn't anything new here that's taking place. You could, if we want to go back to the very beginning, we could go back literally to I will not serve. We could look in the Garden of Eden at Adam's sin due to pride, where he was told not to do something. And then you could go to non-servium, where a man will not serve. In the heart of man dwells no good thing, in Jeremiah. So, but there's thousands of years of isms and of all sorts of issues where man wants to become independent of God. And then if we want to move very quickly to, of Satan's tactics, they're really not that different. It's all sorts of different isms throughout the ages where Satan is trying to bring man to another dimension as long as it's away from God, according to the sociology and cultural history of the day. And if we want to look at who Satan is, we could look at John 10:10. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, where it says, listen to how emotive these words are. Satan comes to kill, destroy, and steal. 10:10a and 10:10b, but I come to give you life and give it more abundantly. At the very, very root of this, it's man trying to become independent of God, and the Great Reset is just a phrase, and we're going to get into this in a minute, of when this even started, when the United States became an economic power. But previously to the United States, there have been many, many kingdoms and powers and empires. You can look at the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, the Mesopotamians. You could look all of the way at the Spanish Armada, the French under the Sun Kings of Louis XIV, 15, and 16, all of the way to the Dutch, which were great, great traders sailing into New York Harbor in 1609. But then what happened, the United States is the 23rd great empire in world history, according to the Will Durant's, the Toynbees, the Yakutas, and other great historians of the 20th century. All of them have had the exact same characteristics of rising and falling. Historians show that it's all identical. And great empires have traditionally have not fallen due to an invader, but have decayed from a moral rot within. And we can exactly see that right now in the United States with what's happening all over in our culture. Just pick a subject that's nauseating every day, whether it be the border, and that great empires don't end because of wars or invaders, but they die of suicide. And the U.S. is actually on this court, especially as we look at our leaders. So
Sure.
then you could, the father of science, who is a father of political science, is Machiavelli. And if you want to see where he codified his thinking, it's in the book, The Prince. So we're getting to the Great Reset here through a little bit of a circuitous route of major people and events. And when Machiavelli wrote The Prince, as I say, he was the father of political science. The Prince is a book that showed an individual that wanted to rise to power to say whatever was necessary to whoever you're with to get your way. This is a critical thought process Christians need to understand. So Machiavelli showed this through The Prince, and it was his most successful book as a major step. So this has been the game, and then we can get all of the way to another major event that brought us to the Great Reset that we're looking at now. You could fast forward to 1717. It's a very, very big date. It's the day on June 24th, 1717, where England came together with men meeting in pubs. They took the name of the pub. And what they did is there had been several Masonic lodges that were very, very disparate according to the ancient rites, which was more through Solomon and stone builders. But what they did is they formed a great lodge to be in 1717, and it's actually June 24th. And what was very interesting, that's the modern feast day of the Sacred Heart, which was actually the day of the Dobbs decision.
No kidding. So they actually formed on June 24th?
June 24th, 1717 is when the Grand Lodge. And I found it interesting because what heaven is doing, and this is critical, heaven is pushing out pus by the bushel basket. We're in a transition phase to where we're literally moving to the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. So then we'll get into that just in a minute. But if you want to now go to an event that was 305 years ago.
So just to give our listeners kind of a summary here, it sounds like what you're saying is that the vast history of the Great Reset really is rooted in the devil's perpetual war against the church, from all the way back when Cain slew Abel, all the way to the modern day, that it really has to do with the devil desiring through his agencies, meaning whether it's, the stonemasons or the Gnostics or the, whatever the ism is that you brought up, that it's those agencies that the devil uses in order to create and foster a world government that is against God, that is anything but God. If it wants to be a governmental system based on sex, then that's what it's going to be, as long as it keeps people away from sanctity. Or if it's based on wealth, or if it's based on fasting and drunkenness, whatever the civilization's fascination is, it is the inspiration of the devil through those attempts at global government to create a system whereby the world is directed against God. Is that a good summary?
have absolutely nailed it. Very few people understand it with that kind of clarity, that history is a continuum. The points that I was just making with Machiavelli and in Freemasonry, this is just the evolution of organizations. That's all this is. It's the evolution in the ideology and the philology of how culture, society, and civilization itself has evolved and become more organized. And if you want to see one of the crowning events for the thinking of these folks, it's the French Revolution, which was 305 years ago. This perfected the technique of these individuals of how to organize. So what was very, very disparate in 1717, now you could go all the way to 1789 with the French Revolution. And these people realized they were smart enough that the church in Europe, it was very Christocentric. It was the entire culture of Western civilization was the church. And they realized these godless people, which were not Catholic, or if they were godless, involved. And they said, we can't take on the Catholic Church. It's too big. It's too organized, it's too structured, it's too wealthy. We can't take them on, so we need another technique. And what was that? That was to embed in the system and subvert from within. This was the genius of these people, of how they decided to take down the church. And think of the word enlightenment. Out of chaos comes order. Right. And we see Freemasonry, this is their thing. Their goal is chaos, and that's what we're witnessing in our culture and our entire world today. Because out of chaos comes order. They can bring, and the more the better, and especially with wars that have been planned with these people, and literally in the think tanks in England all of the way back in the 1890s through the Tavistock Institute in England, where they literally planned 3 world wars. Yep. And they exactly how Chatham House Tavistock Institute, and they literally said how it would come about and how they would do it. And the third World War I and World War II happened as they planned. Yep. It's all in writing for the person who wants to study it and pays attention. And the Third World War was Muslim versus Christian. And then the world will capitulate to our demands.
So really quickly, with regard to Freemasonry and the Enlightenment and the push for world wars and global governments through that particular vein, I have a theory that I've been kind of codifying or working on for several years now. But the theory is simply that the launch of Freemasonry was born out of the Protestant revolt. That it was Protestantism that created the first rebellion within Christendom. And that rebellion, by extension, it was a throwing off of authority, but it required something deeper in order to perpetuate its own revolution. Because eventually people get outrage fatigue, where they can sit there and say, oh, we're outraged. But after a while, it wears off. They need something substantial behind it. So the Enlightenment was, or a lot of the Masonic ideologies were the philosophy that was developed in order to sustain the revolution of the Protestant revolt. And following on that, because they needed to maintain this philosophical ideology, they started throwing off structural aspects of Christendom, which was the monarchy. And that's why the Illuminati and the Enlightenment waged a war against monarchies. That's what the French Revolution was all about. And the French Revolution, I would say, is kind of the testing ground. It's where they wanted to establish their idea of republics. And then from there came the political revolutions that was codified with the Communist Manifesto, which, by the way, as you know, was developed through the Masonic lodges. And then with that, they needed to establish a system that would therefore justify their revolution against monarchy, so they needed to establish universal republics or global republics. And those republics needed to also perpetuate their idea. So you have this unbroken chain of sustained sustainers who themselves have nothing to stand on. So it's kind of a funny idea, but
the Masons had to get rid of monarchies, which they perfected it with the French Revolution through embedding people. We're going to get into that word embed if we have time, very, very deeply, because that's a strategy. But when they put in an elected official, they can put in who they choose and who their obedience is and who's master. So whether you look at the French Revolution of over 300 years ago to the Russian Revolution with the Tsar Nicholas and his family, which had been there for over 300 plus years, they had to get rid of monarchies so they could get into elected officials. Because in the United States, we don't vote for who we want. We vote for who is put in front of us. It's that principle. They can control that politician. Look what's happened with Joe Biden. The guy didn't leave his basement for a year and a half. He's got dementia. He doesn't even know where he is half the time. And if that doesn't show anybody how the established elite control an individual, if they don't understand that, they're never going to get it.
I remember reading a story about who was the head of the Illuminati in Italy. What was his name?
I thought you were going to say Adam Weishaupt.
Not Weishaupt. No, was it Garibaldi?
I don't know who headed it there.
Yeah, well, whoever it was, I think it might have been Garibaldi. But I distinctly remember reading a story. I think it was in John Robison's book, Proofs of a Conspiracy. And he mentioned that one of the individuals, one of the nobility that had joined among the Illuminati, but then he kind of wanted out at one point. And he said as much. And he said, look, I'm not going to reveal secrets. I just want out. So Garibaldi brought him in, said, fine, we're going to have dinner. And he gave him a dinner. And they said, it's great. You know, as soon as you finish, you'll be out and we won't worry about it. And this young noble, about halfway through the dinner, realized that he was suddenly very sick and he had been poisoned. And Garibaldi turned to him and said, I have the antidote right here, but you're going to swear allegiance and never leave our ranks. Otherwise, you're not getting the antidote. And it's that kind of, in the immediate sense, that kind of blackmail, that kind of exertion of power that you see played out in the political spectrum all over the place now, where they have people that they know are compromised in some way, shape, or form that they can use in order to keep them properly secured in their own pockets. And I think people need to understand that that's exactly how these elected officials that you were talking about, they put them in front of us. They're absolutely in the pockets of these individuals.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun here, as a very wise man said once. And it's the same playbook. It's different people. People have asked me maybe somewhere near 5,000 times over the last 22 years, was I going to do an update to the Hope of the Wicked? And I said, no. I said, it's the exact same playbook.
Mm-hmm.
All they do is it's just different names all of the way back for all of these centuries, especially since 1717, where they begin to get organized. But let's fast forward now to who I think is the greatest political philosopher in understanding human nature, if not since Machiavelli, but even surpassing him. Have you ever studied Antonio Gramsci?
Absolutely. He's the founder of cultural Marxism.
Antonio Gramsci was an absolute veritable genius understanding of how to manipulate. And he was the co-founder of the Italian Communist Party. Mm-hmm. And when the 1917 took place in the Soviet Union, he ended up going over in 1922 to see what was happening from Italy. And he went over and in just a very brief amount of time, he didn't think that communism would work because it was too violent, number one, and number two, that the Russian soul was a Christian soul. Yep. And it had 1,000 years since Kiev Rus, all the way to 1988. And he came away with the conclusion it would fail because it was too violent and was too against their culture. And he came back, and Mussolini feared him, and he threw him in jail. And he started writing something called prison notebooks after just spending a little time in Moscow. And what he devised in prison, he said the way to overtake a culture is to infiltrate within, and you only need one person. It's the one bad apple that can spoil the whole bushel basket. And if you get into an organization, tell them whatever they want to hear, i.e. the Prince of Machiavelli, tell them what they want to hear, do whatever is necessary, but organize behind the scenes with people who are sympathetic to you for your agenda. That became the playbook of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks literally changed history to where Hillary Clinton, when she was at Wellesley, did her thesis on Antonio Gramsci.
No, I thought she did her thesis on Saul Alinsky.
Saul Alinsky used Gramsci. Gramsci and Saul Alinsky are the same. I mean, a lot of people talk about Rules for Radicals.
Oh, yeah.
That was actually his second book. Revelry for Radicals was his first book. He perfected it after, and you remember he dedicated the introduction to his book to Satan, the first great organizer.
Yeah. Yep. Who won for himself a kingdom.
Yeah. So Hillary Clinton used the principles. She used Rules for Radicals that at that time would have been Revelry for Radicals. And it was Alinsky who went way beyond more violently. And Alinsky worked very much with Pope Paul VI through Cardinal Bernardine. Mm-hmm. He spent 2 weeks in Castel Gandolfo with Paul VI under the Campaign for Human Development of how to bring socialism into the church through a guise of helping the poor.
Yeah, so we one of the things that our listeners may remember is that we have an article on our website. It's a very long one, but the article is titled "The Marxist Core of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development," and it goes through Saul Alinsky's socialist roots and how he got in with Monsignor Jack Egan and how he got in with then Archbishop Bernardin and then Cardinal Bernardin, and how he got the Catholic Church effectively to fund Saul Alinsky's community organizing groups, and how it was all a communist front. It was all a great big communist front at the expense of the Catholic Church, which is a huge joke to them.
Well, this gets back into how our civilization itself has evolved through this thinking, and now through the internet and the interconnectivity of the world economy. This is now down. This is science now of how they're manipulating people. In that through all of the mob psychosis in so many areas we know. But then, if you want to go to another event in 1917. The Masons marched through the streets of Rome. That many people have seen that famous picture with maybe, if not hundreds, but thousands of Masons marching throughout the streets of Rome in 1917, where they gave themselves 100 years to take over the Vatican. Now, a person who saw that actually was Maximilian Kolbe, who that very day with a group of several other seminarians and friars actually formed Militia Immaculata that very day.
Yep.
Now, and mind you that news didn't travel that fast. In 1917 on that day, Maximilian Kolbe didn't even know anything that was happening in Fatima.
Oh, no kidding.
No, he didn't know that, but he saw the Masonic procession through the streets of Rome. And so what we're seeing is just more and more things of how quick things happen. But what's interesting, the Blessed Mother has said in many places that out of every single target that she's going after right now, which I find is one of the most fascinating things on planet Earth, Blessed Mother says she's not going after, her target's not Russia, China, Iran, the Persian Gulf, the United States. the Korean Peninsula, Islam, nothing. She said her target is Freemasonry, to expose it.
Yep.
That's what we're watching today, whether you're in academia, corporate, military wokeness, no matter what it is, entertainment, anywhere. What we're seeing is you only need to be with a person right now for several minutes. You and I could be with somebody, whoever, for several minutes, and we will know pretty much where they stand by what they're immediately saying. In other words, the gloves are off. There's no neutrality. There's no turtle on a fence post any longer. People now where others stand just by almost an innocuous comment, whether or not they approve of Biden, they approve of what's happening at the Supreme Court, they like AOC or Ilhan Omar or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So they're giving you their heart. And so through just maybe a single comment, people now know where others stand. So this is the global reset that we're seeing. We're literally right now, we're marching to the triumph of the Immaculate Heart that was spoken about at Fatima. And this pus has to come out for us to transition to the other side. It's going to be painful to be a part of, painful to watch. And we know a lot of people are being hurt by it economically. I bet you can't think of a single family that's not been affected by major issues over the last several years.
Oh, without a doubt. One of the things that you can't see the chat room because of the the little glitch we had earlier, but somebody was asking about what Maximilian Kolbe saw. We have on our website an article, and I linked to it in the chat room. The title is "Satan Must Reign in the Vatican. The Pope Will Be His Slave." That statement is in quotation marks. In part of the article, we quote St. Maximilian Kolbe, who wrote on October the 16th, just 3 days after the miracle of Fatima, he wrote this, quote, "These men without God find themselves in a tragic situation. Such implacable hatred for the church and the ambassadors of Christ on earth is not in the power of individual persons, but of a systematic activity stemming in the final analysis from Freemasonry. In particular, it aims to destroy the Catholic religion. Their decrees have been spread throughout the world in different disguises, but with the same goal, religious indifference." That's a huge key here. Religious indifference and weakening of moral forces according to their basic principle, quote, "We will conquer the Catholic Church not by argumentation, but rather with moral corruption." And that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is a quote that goes directly back to Gramsci.
Well, but this is the whole thing. This is, as I say, we went back all the way to Genesis with the fall of Adam. And I mean, you can get back to, I saw an interesting meme the other day where pride goes before the fall. And thrown out due to pride, and it showed a flag with people screaming and all. So we've got a devolution of our culture at a very, very fast rate. But it was Maximilian Kolbe who was smart enough at that time to realize that it would take the Blessed Mother's intervention as the spokesman of the Trinity itself, and with what her unique role is in the world, to expose this. And I see this corruption that's taking place right now in a very necessary state, because, as I say, we now know where people stand over events in the last several years, that no families being exposed. Sister Lucy gave a very famous comment that the final battle would be over marriage in the family, and the world would go through a period of diabolical disorientation. I remember the first time in the mid-'80s I heard that word, diabolical disorientation, and I forgot it. What emotive words, descriptive.
Highly.
But if you want to get back to you had indicated you wanted to get back of where things are today. They've pretty much sewn it up. They're in total control at the moment in what's happening in government, academia. I mean, you can't even get a position right now in an elite university if you're conservative. But have you heard of the Senior Elective Service in Government, SESers?
No, please explain that.
It's very interesting with a guy with your savoir-faire. But what's happened is that I went to a party just the other night after the Dobbs decision, and there was a man that I've known from church for about 20 years, and I've known that he's senior intel, and I knew his family. He's second generation high intel, and he made a comment to me when we were talking that the person who actually, we were talking about stuff that's going on political, and he said the person who actually was the best at embedding people in government for ideology were the Clintons. Now remember, he had eight years. When a president gets the second term, they don't have to worry about running again, and that's where they really have an agenda that they can effectuate.
Right.
And so there's a group in government called the Senior Elective Service. If somebody wants to Google it, the acronym is SESers here in town. And now listen to this number. Their salary starts at $135,000 up to $203,000. They're in essence the SS or the shock troops in government. They're accountable to really no one other than cabinet official, and they can't be fired. Their role is they're above the GS schedule of 1 through 15. And they pretty much run government. There's over 8,000 SES people in government that can't be fired. They're the people who actually run government in the United States. They're career people. They stay in. They know how the branches of government work. And they're in 180 federal agencies where they're pulling the levers behind the screen.
So by knowing how government works, I think what you mean is they know all the backroom deals. They know all the right paperwork to file and the right backs to rub in order to get things moving.
They can absolutely control the flow of paper. And that's why it was Clint. He made the comment to me that nobody was effective. He's still in at a very, very senior level. And he made the comment to me literally just at a party a few weeks ago that nobody was as effective in all of government at embedding people with their ideology. They just didn't make what's called Schedule C appointments. Every president gets about 4,000 Schedule C, which is something out of the plum book. Huh. It's the color of a plum, kind of a lavender purple, where it's all of the federal appointees. But Schedule C's come and go, but SESers stay. And they're the ones who absolutely, totally control paper and what's done in Congress as what gets there, because you can create problems, or as the Soviets say, create obstacles. They can obfuscate, or if they're on your side, they can make things happen very, very quickly. So in essence, what they've done is use the principles of Machiavelli and Gramsci and Alinsky, and they've embedded very, very deeply. And that's why we're in a complete downfall, because Obama had 8 years, Clinton had 8 years. Frankly, Bush was both of the Bushes were rhinos, as we know. And it was Trump actually coming against all of these years since literally Ronald Reagan, where he was against the forces of hell itself. And they have to bury this guy. They can't give this guy any break that he could ever run and be elected again. And that's why it was so vicious. They had to get rid of him. They're controlling all of the appointments. everything to do in corporate media, judiciary, political, activist judges, Schedule Cs. They're controlling the narrative. And that is the deep state and the deep church. And if you want to look at how the most nauseous group in all of government is the intel agency, and how that's 1947, Harry Truman realized that they needed a group of people collecting intelligence for the United States government. So that's when this, after Wild Bill Donovan, that's when the Central Intelligence Agency was actually created.
Sure, and I don't know if some of our listeners know, but the CIA was built around Operation Paperclip, where at the end of World War II, the United States government was they were using paperclip files in order to get Nazi intelligence agencies out of Germany. The idea was, well, we don't want to execute them because they know stuff, but we don't want them to fall into Soviet hands because then they could use the stuff that they know against us. So we want to bring them over to the United States so that they can tell us stuff. And they used Operation Paperclip to bring over a bunch of Nazi scientists. They brought over a bunch of Nazi intelligence agents, and those intelligence agents wound up helping the United States to develop the International Intelligence Agency called the OSS, or worked with the OSS in order to further develop it. And then from there, they changed it to the CIA.
Yeah, and what happened with Harry Truman after the war, they found, and now here's the real big deal that happened of why the shadow government can operate with impunity. They founded the National Security Act. And that gave intel agencies the ability to operate with impunity with no oversight. That's a key thing to understand. That's why Congress, they don't, in all of the movies that we see of how these intel agencies act with impunity. And I can tell you, I've been in Washington now 45 years, and I've never seen a group of people that start literally right after they get out of college that get so arrogant so quick. Sure. And I've been with kids 6 months. They've graduated and they've been with one of the intel agencies where there's a total of 17 of them, not just a few, with the alphabet. There's 17 intel organizations. And I'm telling you, I've been with kids 6 months out of college where they look at you like, you stupid man. If you knew what I knew, you would never say what you're saying. That's the appearance they give people with their arrogance, because there's no oversight in that group. They do just what they want. They print their own money. Mm-hmm. They create coup d'etats, and you've only seen 4,000 movies on this subject.
Sure. I want to draw this back actually to what we know about the Freemasons and the secret societies, because what we know about the CIA is that they recruit heavily from the Ivy League schools, and in particular, they recruit very heavily from among an Ivy League organization called Skull and Bones. George Bush the Elder was a member of Skull and Bones. He was also, at one point, the director of the CIA. And
than that, Michael, Bush 41's father, Prescott Bush, who was a senator from Connecticut, was Skull and Bones.
Yes.
It goes Prescott 41 and 43. And Prescott Bush's nickname was Geronimo because the legend inside Skull in Averell Harriman era, who was also, his number was 332 out of the Russell Trust. Mm-hmm. It's a thing of patronage. It gets back to being embedded,
right,
of how close they are to work for each other's agenda.
And the other thing that should be pointed out, if you look at the other intelligence agencies around the world, the British MI6, which is of the famous James Bond, fame, MI6 heavily recruits and actually mandates that their members are Freemasons. So you have another intelligence agency that is highly connected to a secret society. If you want to go back to World War II, the Nazis, you look at what the German SS was. They had a little skull and crossbones on their it was their logo. It was the skull and crossbones. The I think it was the nickname was Totenkopf, which is death head. And they were all part of a secret society. A lot of them were members of the Thule Society, which was this Gnostic cult within Nazism. So you look at the various intelligence agencies around the world, and it's pretty clear that the connection to the occult, the connection to secret societies, and going back to what you were talking about, how all of this is part of the devil's war being waged on the Catholic Church and on families, is all interconnected.
Well, that's just it. It's old. There's nothing new. It's just new players. I mean, if you talk about the schools, Skull and Bones, there's actually even a movie on it called Skulls with some people pretty well known. But they recruit pretty heavily from Princeton, Harvard, Georgetown, and Fletcher School at Tufts.
Right.
And it's all about patronage is what it is. And they protect each other. And basically, once you're a member of that club, you get an easy career. There was a man I had played golf with several years ago. Our daughters commuted, and the daughter was in my foyer every day for like 4 years because the carpool met at my house where they would drive to school. And we were playing golf one day, and I knew him quite well. And he had just become a manager of a very, very large facility, like 2 million square foot facility in our area, which I won't name. And he was told that if he wanted to be promoted, he would have to join the Masons. He's telling me that on the 17th green.
Wow.
But that's how it works. It's a thing of patronage. And once you get embedded, their loyalty is to each other. Here's something. There's 3 chapters in the book, and the first one is the lessons of Nuremberg, of how what happened in Germany, of how the people basically just got so caught up and went along to go along. And then I wrote another chapter called The Banality of Evil. And I'm reading Hannah Arendt's book called The Banality of Evil. And I don't know if you know the story, but she was a writer at that time, not for the Atlantic, for the New York, not the New York Times, the New York, I forget the name of the magazine now. But she was sent over to Germany. She wanted to cover the Adolf Eichmann trial in Jerusalem after he had been captured in Latin America. And this, I was just reading the book. It actually floored me. I couldn't believe I was reading it. That's why I did 2 articles on it. She was at the trial, and she thought when she went over there, Adolf Eichmann ran all of the death camps and he was in charge of all of the distribution for the camps and how they operated for all the Third Reich. And she thought when she went over there, she couldn't comprehend as a secular Jew how anybody could be so evil. So she went over for the trial. And this was an amazing thing. You know how if you know what to look for and what you see, you know how to interpret the news. It's like if you don't understand the globalist agenda is depopulation, you don't know how to really watch the news. And so she was over there, and she thought she'd see a guy in the courtroom in Jerusalem who in essence had horns, you know, a pitchfork, and smoke coming out of his ears and nose. And she found the direct opposite. She found a bland bureaucrat who simply went along to go along and went to go along to get along for promotion. And then in one of the chapters, it just stopped me in my tracks. Eichmann became a very strong figure in the Third Reich when he joined the Masons.
Yep.
And she actually pointed that out in a book, and I don't think she even knew what it meant, but she did make the comment that his rise to power in the Third Reich is when he joined the Masons. Whoa. So this is all over if you know what you're looking for.
Sure. Now, we've talked an awful lot about the political developments revolving around basically the philosophical ideology of taking over the church and taking over the state and implementing a global government and operating through secret societies, operating through intelligence agencies, and operating through political machinations. But what I'd like to turn to is the question of the infiltration of the church and the changes that are taking place and the players that are participating, and ultimately their element in trying to rein in or bring about this great reset. Before we get into that, though, I want to let all of our viewers know that if they want to join the anchor team, which is what we do here every Friday night, every once in a while we make it a general broadcast that everybody can see. But if you'd like to join the anchor team, it's only $15 a month. That's 30 cents a day. What you do is in joining the anchor team is you are helping us maintain the kind of research, the kind of investigative journalism that we engage in order to bring you the truth about what's going on in the society and in what's going on in the church. So if you'll join the anchor team, even if you can't watch every Friday, everything's archived. You can watch whenever you want. Just join the anchor team, $15 a month. It would be a huge help. So, Ted, going back to your this discussion on the Great Reset within society, let's turn now to the church. People are asking about Pope Francis and the Great Reset, and why is he involved with the World Economic Forum, and why is he pushing the Sustainable Development Goals? What's going on here?
Well, let's now just transfer everything we've been talking about politically.
Okay.
To just a group of men who happen to be in the clergy or whatever. It's the exact same principle. There was a very famous quote many years ago when they asked Pope John the 23rd how many people worked in the Vatican. And do you remember his answer?
No.
He said about half.
Oh.
And so, let's transfer over patronage, largesse, privilege, authority, easy careers, easy living, fine wine, fine food, sightseeing, travel. And there's a group in the church that's called the Paridi in Rome, that they just pretty much the strap hangers and the people who hang around but really don't do much. This is the exact same principle. I remember speaking with Malachi Martin in the mid-90s. He did the introduction for one of my books, and we used to speak at length. He came down even to see me once, and I used to spend hours in his apartment.
Wow.
In D3 and 4. And the name of the Masonic Lodge in Rome is the P2 Lodge, the Propaganda Due. He felt that about a third of the cardinals were Masons. A third of them were pretty much would go along with anything. And there was probably about 20% who he considered to be really solid men like Cardinal Gagnon and some other people, guys like Fagano.
That's a very interesting number, a third, because it reminds me of Revelation, the dragon's tail sweeping a third of the stars.
Yeah, a third of the stars fall from heaven in Revelation.
Huh.
Yeah. And so the Propaganda Due, the P2 Lodge, whether or not you wanted to look at things like Blackfriars Bridge, there's an interesting book that I just finished about a month ago. It's called Murder in the 33rd Degree, if you haven't heard of it.
By Charles Muir.
By Father Charles Muir. And he said something very, very interesting. In the two interviews that I've seen with him, where I could hear him speaking, not just reading something, he made a fascinating comment at the end of both where he wanted to insert this in. It wasn't the general flow of the conversation. He said, I want to say this. He said, we are so far gone with what's happening in the corruption in the Vatican that the only solution now for the church and mankind is a divine intervention.
Yeah.
Fascinating comment to make.
Yeah, I have to agree with his assessment.
that due to the interconnectivity of the world economy, with what's happening with everything to do with tech and control and mass psychosis in so many different areas of how they're controlling what we think and do, and this the oligarchs with tens of billions of dollars forming mass opinions using even a lot of people like MK Ultra and other programs. That was his conclusion, and that's been mine for many, many years.
You know, by way of analogy, I don't know how many people here struggle with silkworms getting into their trees and eating the trees alive. Sometimes the only way to take care of them, because they form these giant silk nests inside the tree, sometimes the only way to get rid of them is just to set them on fire. And if you were to consider the church a tree, and the mechanism, the interconnectivity of the people we're talking about being a silkworm nest, you just got to light them on fire.
Well, that's why you specifically bring up the church. I don't see any difference with man's human nature and the desire for ease and comfort for so many people that there's any difference between political academia. I mean, I know a professor very, very well at Georgetown who I have coffee with. He said, he's not given the time of day. And I described he's a full professor, a head of a chair. And he said the only, they won't give him the time of day there. They despise him, but he's tenured.
Mm.
And I describe his profession as a missionary. And I mean, as I say, the group you talk about specifically, the Pope, I mean, the Jesuits as a group of men. I went to, I did my junior year abroad in Switzerland with Georgetown. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that the group, I describe the Jesuits as a group of men who have historically done great good in the church and most recently great harm. Yeah. The Jesuits as a group of men have completely lost their way. End of story.
Yep.
They've lost their way. If you, when my kids were looking at schools, I wouldn't let them, had my son gone to Boston College, he would have been fourth generation in our family to go to BC consecutively. Mm-hmm. I was never going to send him to Boston College or Georgetown than the man in the moon.
Yeah.
Because everybody that we met that's gone there has frankly lost their faith.
So in regard to these individuals who have infiltrated the church, we can tell that the people on the outside, I mean, I know their goals are the same, but what are their proximate goals? So the proximate goals of the people in politics and the people in the international intelligence communities, what they're trying to do is usher in this idea of global government on a political and police enforced scale. But these individuals in the church seem to be going about it with a different tack. What would you say that tack is?
Well, the tack is to, again, I think there's a particular agenda right now for many, many years to rid the world, to rid the church of orthodoxy. And if you were to go right back to the very, very root, it's a secular agenda. Now, I've been doing what I've been doing for a long time, writing on, as you know, a lot of the things that the Blessed Mother's been doing. Mm-hmm. And I've come to the firm conclusion why there is so much animus to a lot of the stuff that we've been involved in. They discount and don't want, and right to the bottom line, they don't want anything to do with the supernatural.
Wow.
They need to get rid of the supernatural to control man. And because that's the divinity of Jesus.
Right.
So they rid the world of that. That's why you have so much, they're going about this secular. We've got a pope that is very much going with the science of climate change, and they're using climate change. We know they've used other agendas in the last couple of years in a very venomous way to take control. And let me tell you, when you use some of the things they've been using, and I understand we're being careful of language here due to algorithms, but this is pure, this gets back to Gramsci and Machiavelli. This is genius how they've pulled this off.
Sure.
and the programs that they've used to implement this. It's genius. But what you've got is tremendously corrupted individuals that are bought and sold for at the governmental level. How is a guy like Fauci making $450,000 a year with a pension that's going to be $414,000?
Unbelievable.
In government? Are you kidding me? This is the elite class. Being around Washington and Northern Virginia now all of these years, it's the government workers who are elite. That, you spend a couple of years in government, you're getting 5 and 6 weeks off, 10 holidays. They all take 2 weeks. I know people in government that probably work 10% of the year. And if they're commuting from home, half of them are out playing golf.
Boy, I'd like to, play golf for $500,000 a year.
Yeah, and what it is they're the elite people right now in the food chain for employment. They're untouchable. Once you become a federal employee, you're really untouchable through the strength of a union. And it's the government giving them, it's the politicians giving them everything they want for so long, just like they gave the police and the fire, because they're such a large voting bloc. Sure. They're very, very, very powerful. There's, I think, 2 million federal workers. And they can't agitate that in Congress because they want that vote. So they give them everything they want. So again, back to your church thing, it's the exact same principles. It's people that pretty much do what they want, when they want, and how they want. And that's why, because there isn't a check and a balance, you've got so many of our cardinals right now that have turned into flat-out tyrants. Because how? They've been promoted from within through patronage and largesse in good assignments. Right.
Yeah. And their goal, what would you say their approximate goal is?
Boy, that's broad. That's interesting. It's a little too broad for me in terms of trying to be rather than trite. But sure. I think they're looking to break down orthodoxy and through the supernatural.
I agree, and I ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to realize, and I know that you do realize, this is a spiritual battle as much as it is a physical battle, as much as it is a political battle. And within the Catholic Church, I think that what we are witnessing is a systemic breakdown of the treasury of grace that the church offers in order to combat the one who is restrained, the devil himself. Why would the church be going after cloistered nuns, trying to shut down cloisters? What is their purpose? What is their goal? Well,
first of all, I think that the hierarchy realizes that there's hundreds of millions of dollars. I just visited 2 Carmelite monasteries, one for men and women, and I spent about 90 minutes on the woman's side and then about 90 minutes with the men. And, they know they're going to have to make a decision in the very, very near future with everything that's going on. I didn't ask them what that was because I didn't want to embarrass them.
Sure.
But, the church is after that money. You could have Father James Martin, S.J., running around in all of the chanceries of the United States and being welcomed. But meanwhile, they're looking to close down a Carmelite monastery that's been operating since the 16th century. I mean, come on, let's wake up.
Yeah. Well, and the spiritual component to it also is that by closing down those monasteries, they're not only getting the money out of the closure of the cloister, but they would also be cutting off that part of the treasury of grace that is afforded to us in order to resist against what the devil and his agents are trying to enact. So I do think that inside the church, the ecclesiastical masons, what they're trying to do is cut those strings, cut those attachments to those sources of grace that keep us going, that give us the strength and the resolve in order to resist what the devil is trying to impose on us.
Listen, ecclesiastical masonry is as powerful in the church, and possibly more so because it's smaller and they're more homogenous than the diversity of the political realm. And I remember once, many years ago, one of the most interesting evenings I had, I was at a meeting actually at the Wyndham Hotel in Philadelphia. And Alice von Hildebrand came up to me and she grabbed me by the elbow and she said, "Would you sit with me at dinner?" And it was one of these meetings where you just go through the line and you sit at any vacant table. And she had read Hope of the Wicked. And I didn't know this until I had dinner with her, but Dietrich von Hildebrand, towards the end of his life, having understood what happened in Germany, spent the last few years of his life totally devoting himself to exposing Freemasonry in the church, a lot like Father Luigi Villa did.
Wow.
He was commissioned by Padre Pio to do that, and then he went to Pope Pius XII. And so Alice von Hildebrand said to me, she said, "I read Hope of the Wicked. I liked it. It's true. And this cabal of evil, not the word deep state wasn't there yet, is very evil." And here's the line she gave me. It was almost a life-changing experience to hear this line of how the Masons understood how the church operates to destroy it from within. And she said, a leading Mason told her husband, listen to this line, "We will destroy your church through obedience."
Oh.
Whoa.
Wow.
We will destroy your church through obedience. Now think of all of the canceled clergy and all of the priests who do want to speak out, but because of the vow of obedience and being basically sent to the marshlands of Drogheda, that and never heard from again in some swamp, that if they speak against the clergy. So take a look at the clergy who are trying to do what's right and then either canceled, marginalized, or flat out persecuted.
That is incredible.
We will destroy your church through obedience.
You know, earlier you'd said that really the power of the elites within society and within our church is absolute at this point, and that we're totally surrounded. And I want to read to you this quote from the Congressional Medal of Honor winner Chesty Puller. He was in the middle of a battle, in the heat of one of the most intense battles of his life, and a lower officer said to him, "Sir, do you know that they have us cut off? We're entirely surrounded." And Chesty Puller said, "Those poor bastards, they've got us right where we want them. We can shoot in every direction now." So as we finish up and wrap up this evening, I would like for you to speak to that and just kind of give us that hope, give us that message of Our Lady that we absolutely need to hear, so that we understand, look, we're not abandoned, even though we are surrounded on all sides. Just remember the psalmist who said, I'm compassed about. In the Lord's name, I slew them. So if you could speak to that for just a minute so that we can have that message of hope and understand that even in the darkest part of what we're going through, it's like going through a tunnel. There is light on that other side, and we will find salvation through Our Lady. Please speak to that.
Glad to end up like that because I wanted to. I would say two things. God plus one is a majority. They've got us right where we want them.
Amen.
God one in any situation is a majority. You can look at anything to do with in Scripture. What you will see anybody listening, if you just open up the Bible, you will see the supernatural. And this is back to your question you've asked twice. They want to do away with the supernatural because that's the divinity of Jesus. And that's what distinguishes him from all other men and leaders and gods, with them, others being a small g. But if you go back and look at the first saint of the new millennium, it would be Sister Faustina. And if you look at the prayer, be not despondent or be in despair. of everything that could be said for our time. The greatest asset Satan has is to create discouragement and despair. I mean, there's no question certain days I'm bummed out by the news, but I know this, in the end we win. We're in this transition phase, and it's going to be painful to watch the pusses coming out by the bushel basket. It's necessary as we transition, and it's going to be rugged. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll have overtaken our culture. There isn't a family right now that I know of that doesn't have a serious issue going on with it, either relationally, sickness, death, from all of the different areas that we're aware of that's happening. And the division, especially in families, due to the ideology of the individuals being so different of what our existence is really about. But there's one thing that's most encouraging that I'd like to leave all of your listeners with, and it's this. The assignment that'll just take a few minutes, there's two of them. One is Romans 1. That's where I have a chapter in the book called The Mind of an Unbeliever. And Romans 1 is the best I can ever come up with, where St. Paul, towards the end of his life, writing his most important letter to the Romans, that's the deepest of all of his epistles, as he's going to shortly be martyred at Tre Fontane in Italy. And he gives the 23 descriptions of an unbeliever. And one of them, in the Jerusalem version of the Bible, which is Catholic, is hysterical. He literally, he talks about reprobate and depraved minds and all of that. But one of them, it's like St. Paul just had a couple of beers at the pub with his buddies, and he literally says they have no brains. And that's why it's so difficult to speak right now to an unbeliever or a person who's not tracking with us on the stuff in our ideology, because frankly, it's what St. Paul said, which was pagan at the time. These people are actually pagan. To have a view thinking that you can kill a baby in its mother's womb or mutilate a child to be transgender, that's a pagan ideology that's worked its way into a pagan practice. That's like what St. Paul's talking about to the Romans. It's pagan.
Right.
It's not just unbeliever. But the other one is reading Jeremiah 29, verse 4 through 14, only 10 verses, where the Lord himself has given us a prescription for peace. And that prescription, the Lord told Jeremiah to tell his people how to live in captivity. Now, mind you, that's like you or I or anybody going out the door tonight and finding a Russian or Chinese soldier telling us where we can go or not go or do or not do. And it's that severe to live in captivity under a foreign power. And the reason the Hebrew people were put in captivity, the Lord was very clear in the years of Daniel. It was because of disobeying what to many people today is innocuous, disobeying the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Many people really do pay attention to what the Sabbath is, which happens to be a commandment.
Right.
And there's only 10 of them. And they're not suggestions either. And so listen to the prescription that Jeremiah gives to the people in captivity. Plant, harvest, have children, give your daughters away to husbands, and give your sons away to wives, and take care of your grandchildren. That's it. Yeah. I mean, it's 10 verses, but what he's saying is keep your traditions, do what you do, go about your business, do your job, clean your car, cut your grass, do whatever you need to do, and provide for your family. And we don't need to worry about all of these things that are being talked about and open up, 150 negative emails a day, of which we all get them. And it's too easy just to focus on the negative. But the Lord specifically says, go about your business and keep your traditions. That's been the greatest, and that's the chapter in the book called The Daniel Factor.
Amen.
Of how Daniel thrived. And look what happened under Daniel, to where the king elevated him. Nebuchadnezzar elevated him.
Right.
Because of fidelity to his faith, the Lord honored that. So between Romans 1 and Jeremiah 29, 4 through 14, there is tremendous consolation for believers of how we're to navigate in these rugged times.
Absolutely. The family is at the center of everything that we do. It's at the center of the very heart of the church. We have to remember the church our church began with the family. It began in the Garden of Eden with the family of Adam and Eve, and it began again with the family of Joseph and Mary and our blessed Lord. So please, everything that we do is centered on the family. All of our prayer life, all of our beliefs, everything that we do in our culture, if it's not centered on the family is absolutely essential for building and rebuilding civilization. So as Ted said, please read those portions of scripture, first Romans and then also Jeremiah 9 through, or was it 29?
29, 4 through 14.
29.
But it'll change your view. It's hard. First one is it's hard to negotiate and talk to a pagan today, although you've got to love them. But it's hard to reason with them. But for peace of mind, peace of soul, and peace of body, I have found great solace from literally the Lord himself to his people in captivity.
Absolutely.
And to a certain extent, we're experiencing those hardships.
Absolutely. Ted Flynn, everybody. Thank you so much for being on the program this evening. I do hope that we will have another conversation at some point, because there's a lot for us to cover. I think that we have a wealth of knowledge between the two of us to really go over and get into some of the nitty gritty. We could even pick just one chapter of one book and dive into a lot of what you've found and what I've discovered in the intermittent years. This has been a great interview. I do hope that you will come back again.
I would love it. I'd really enjoy, for the fact that I've got people now into two categories in life. You either get it or you don't get it. And listening to you, you get it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the program. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to join the Anchor team, it's just $15 a month. That's 50 cents a day. By doing so, you would be helping us to have these kinds of conversations, to continue the investigations into the organizations like the Campaign for Human Development, Catholic Relief Services, the Dissident Association of United States Catholic Priests, which I could go on for days about, because they are really the shock troops behind the dissent within the church currently in the United States. Anyway, $15 a month. The Anchor team, just go to the website, lepantoin.org/Anchor team, and please sign up. We'd love to have you. In the meantime, I want to let all of our regular viewers know I am not going to be doing a program next week. I hope to find a substitute for me so that we can continue to have a program. But I am actually going on a trip to the Napa Institute in order to talk to people and mingle and whatever people do at the Napa Institute. In any event, please sign up, and I will see you all next week. Or I won't, but somebody else will. And why don't we close with our prayer? In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Our Lady of Victory, pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thanks, everybody, so much for being a part of the program this evening, and I hope that you have a wonderful weekend and a great next week.